Welcome to the Cheating Confession Reddit channel. Today, I'm going to share with you a real-life cheating story. It will give you a better understanding of the issue of infidelity today and help you be more cautious when it comes to a cheating wife. Let's dive into this story together.
From my position near the entrance, I watched the smooth, almost effortless movements of the pair on the dance floor. He held her close, their steps flowing in perfect unison, as though they were two parts of a single entity gliding seamlessly across the room. Their chemistry was undeniable, a harmony that left no doubt they were in sync as dance partners. My wife's face radiated pure joy, lost entirely in the moment. The room resonated with applause and cheers from the audience, mingling with the music that filled the air. I had wandered in from the bar, driven by curiosity to catch a glimpse of Linda during her weekly dance practice, an activity she cherished, but one that had never quite resonated with me. She had been thrilled to join a dedicated dance group through the social club, an outlet for her enduring passion. Leaning casually against the doorframe, I sipped my drink and observed as Linda and her partner drifted to the far side of the room. They lingered there, still clasping hands, animatedly discussing their performance. A faint sting of jealousy crept in as I noticed their intertwined fingers. Such a small, yet undeniably intimate gesture. They soon joined another couple, laughing and chatting as if nothing else in the world mattered. My presence here was unplanned, a spur-of-the-moment decision after an early finish at work. Typically, I wouldn't be home until midnight, but an unexpectedly light workload left me with rare free hours. Linda hadn't been expecting me, and she hadn't even glanced in my direction since I arrived. Her partner, George, drew my attention. He was an older man, likely in his early 60s, retired, and a good 2 decades older than us. He carried himself with a self-assured ease, the kind of confidence that naturally commanded notice. Linda had mentioned him more than a few times, always praising his skill on the dance floor, though I had largely tuned her out after the first couple of mentions. Tonight, however, I felt compelled to see this man for myself, curiosity, and perhaps something deeper pulling me here. Linda and I had been married for 20 years, much of our time together focused on raising our 2 teenagers, Rachel, now 18, and Ryan, 16, both increasingly independent and carving their own paths. With the house feeling quieter, we'd agreed a few years ago to expand our social circles. Joining the local social club had seemed like the perfect solution. From group outings to themed events, it offered a variety of activities we could enjoy both together and separately. For a while, the arrangement worked well, but as Linda's devotion to dancing grew, it began to consume more and more of her time. What started as an occasional hobby quickly became a weekly commitment, with extra sessions added whenever possible. Seated at a corner table with my drink, I watched as Linda stood at the edge of the dance floor. George's arms were around her waist, his stance exuding a possessiveness that made my stomach twist. They seemed completely at ease together, her relaxed demeanor adding to my unease. Anger bubbled beneath the surface as I struggled with the sight of their closeness. But before I could dwell too long, the music changed, prompting the dancers to reshuffle into new pairs. Linda moved fluidly into the arms of another man, also older, likely in his 60s like George. I couldn't help but notice that most of the men here were older, often partnered with noticeably younger women. A bitter thought crossed my mind. No wonder these men all looked so content. Her new partner held her with firm confidence, his hand resting on the small of her back. Linda's face was slightly flushed, though whether from exertion or something else, I couldn't be sure. Deciding I'd seen enough, I retreated to the bar, planning to wait for her there. The session was nearing its end, and I resolved to act as though my arrival had been purely coincidental. With another drink in hand, I found a seat near one of the fruit machines and blended into the background. As the dancers began leaving the function room, I scanned the crowd for Linda. Minutes passed, but she didn't appear. Unease gnawed at me, prompting me to weave through the dispersing group and peer into the now vacant room. There was no sign of her, or George. A knot tightened in my stomach as I stepped outside into the crisp night air. The parking lot lay silent, dotted with still cars. Where could she be? I tried to convince myself that perhaps she had caught a ride home, but an insistent doubt lingered. The way she and George had interacted, the subtle touches, their closeness, nagged at me. I headed to my car, my thoughts racing with unease. If she'd left before me, she should already be home. It wasn't even 9:30 yet, and I wouldn't normally be expected back until after midnight. Perhaps I was overthinking, but something felt distinctly off. The drive home was tense, my mind looping through 1,000 possibilities. Pulling into the garage, I noticed Linda's car in its usual spot. Its cold exterior suggested she hadn't driven it that evening. Could she have gotten a ride to the club too? Stepping into the quiet house through the kitchen, I felt the emptiness acutely. The silence was thick, almost oppressive. A glance at the clock showed it was just shy of 10 p.m. None of it made sense. If she'd left early, how had I missed her on the road? Unease settled deeper as I headed upstairs to shower, hoping the hot water might soothe my restless thoughts. Instead, the unanswered questions only multiplied. Who had she been with? Why wasn't she home yet? By 11 p.m., I found myself pacing the living room, a volatile mix of worry and anger building inside me. My mind raced through countless scenarios, none of them comforting. Was I letting my imagination run wild, or was there something more troubling at play? A sinking feeling told me that tonight wasn't like other nights, that her absence was intentional rather than coincidental. Yet I had no concrete proof, only the weight of a nagging intuition. Glancing at the clock again, 11:27, I realized that if Linda was up to something, she'd likely try to be home soon, knowing I wouldn't normally arrive until after midnight. Moving quickly, I tidied the shower upstairs, erasing any signs of my earlier presence. Whatever was going on, I needed answers, and I needed them soon. I slipped out through the back door without a sound, locking it securely behind me before heading into the garage. The clock read 11:38 p.m. Should I stay hidden here or take off in my car? Her car was already in the driveway, suggesting she wouldn't need to come into the garage. Assuming she'd enter through the front door instead, I opted to wait in the shadows. I climbed into my car and disabled the garage door opener, a necessary precaution. Getting discovered wasn't an option. The stillness in the garage was stifling, making every small noise feel deafening. Time crawled by. At 11:58 p.m., I heard the faint hum of an approaching car. My pulse quickened, my ears straining for details. The engine purred softly, a low vibration that to me seemed impossibly loud in the quiet. My heart pounded, blood rushing in my ears, drowning out every other sound. By 12:03 a.m., I heard the soft click of a car door closing, followed by the vehicle pulling away. Then, the faint creak of my front door opening and closing reached me. Relief washed over me, and for a brief moment I allowed myself to relax. But the calm was short-lived. Tension crept back, simmering deep within, coiling into a tight knot of anger. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to remain still. I needed to wait. Finally, at 12:18 a.m., I stepped out of my car and quietly exited the garage. To my surprise, the back door was unlocked this time. Odd. She must have left it that way, which was unlike her. I entered the kitchen and called out casually, "It's just me." Her voice floated down from upstairs. "Hey, love, everything okay?" "I'm drying my hair," she added. I tossed my dirty clothes into the washing machine and paused when I noticed a few items already inside. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pulled them out, a bra and a pair of panties, her purple set, the one she'd recently bought. I hesitated, then picked up the panties, feeling the damp fabric between my fingers. Lifting them to my nose, I caught her familiar scent, but beneath it was something else, something sharper and unmistakable. I recoiled in disgust, throwing the garments back into the washer. My suspicions deepened, but I needed more than this. Jumping to conclusions now would lead to confrontation, and I wasn't ready for that, not without concrete proof. If this situation was going to erupt, I wanted the flames to leave nothing behind. My thoughts flicked briefly to the kids. Where were they? I realized I hadn't seen or thought about them all evening. Then it hit me. It was Wednesday, and they didn't have classes this week. They were likely staying with friends. That added up. Determined, I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, each step heavy with dread. I didn't know what I might find, but I was certain of one thing. The truth would come out, and when it did, a confrontation would be unavoidable. Inside the bedroom, Linda sat at her dressing table, drying her hair. She turned, flashing me a bright smile. "How was your evening?" I asked. "Fine. I went to dance class as usual. Brian gave me a lift. Have you met him at the club?" Her tone was light, casual, but her smile carried something I couldn't quite put my finger on. "No, I don't think I have. He's a dancer too?" "Yeah, he comes with his wife. They're regulars. He dropped me off tonight." Her eyes briefly locked on mine, as if measuring my reaction. I glanced at the towel wrapped around her. "Did you just take a shower?" Her expression flickered, almost imperceptibly tightening. "Yeah, earlier. I haven't gotten into pajamas yet. My hair felt sticky, so I decided to wash it. You know how much I hate that." A faint blush rose on her cheeks as she turned back to adjust her hairdryer. I knew she wasn't being truthful, but I forced myself to stay composed. I leaned in and kissed her cheek. "I'm exhausted. I'll head to bed." Stripping off my clothes, I slipped under the covers, my eyes fixed on her reflection in the mirror. She noticed my gaze and offered a weak smile, one that barely masked her unease. "You okay?" she asked, her voice tentative. "You seem different." "I'm fine," I replied calmly. "As long as you're okay. Did you enjoy dancing? You love it so much. I've been thinking about joining. Maybe I'll take a few lessons, meet your friends." "That'd be nice," she said, her tone careful. "The group's planning a trip to Blackpool soon, just a weekend getaway. Nothing definite yet." The mention of Blackpool felt deliberate, almost like she was testing me. My thoughts spiraled. Could she and Brian be plotting something? It seemed far-fetched. Too many people would notice, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Eventually, she slipped into bed, her nervous glances at the mirror confirming my suspicions. She switched off the bedside lamp and murmured, "Good night, hun." In the darkness, my mind churned, piecing together the clues. The damp underwear, the timing of her arrival, and now this carefully placed mention of a trip. It all painted a damning picture. My resolve hardened. I wouldn't act until I had every piece of evidence. Only then would I confront her. Morning arrived. When I came downstairs after a quick shower, Linda was already at the table, a steaming cup of coffee in her hand as she read the newspaper. Breakfast TV played softly in the background. She looked up and smiled, her eyes holding a glint of something I couldn't name. "Morning, love. Sleep well?" she asked. "Well enough," I replied, keeping my tone cheerful. "Coffee smells good." I poured a mug and offered to refill hers, but she shook her head. Sitting down with a piece of toast, I watched her over the rim of my cup. "How was dance class last night?" I asked, my voice casual as I pretended to scan the sports section. Her eyes stayed on the paper. "Same as always. The usual people. Didn't I tell you this last night? You seemed pretty tired." Her tone was steady, her face calm, but the tension between us was tangible, a silent, unspoken game of cat and mouse. For now, I would wait. "It's all right, sweetheart. I was pretty worn out myself, so I wasn't expecting much last night," I said, sneaking another glance at her. She avoided my gaze, which made the corner of my mouth twitch. Was that a flicker of guilt? "I have to meet a friend this morning, but I won't be long. Did you mention something about a club trip yesterday? I might have tuned out and missed it." I kept an eye on her face, searching for any subtle reaction. She stiffened slightly, but quickly turned a page of her newspaper before responding. "Oh, right. I think I did. Some folks from the dance group are talking about a weekend trip to Blackpool, visiting the Tower Ballroom and all that. There aren't many details yet, but someone's checking on hotel reservations for a small group." After a brief pause, she added, "Would you be okay with me going?" Her explanation had the polished tone of something rehearsed, but I replied casually, "Is it a couple's trip, like husbands and wives, or just dance partners?" "I think it's mostly for dance partners," she said, glancing at me over her glasses. "They're keeping it small. 4 pairs, tops. If you'd rather I didn't go, I won't sign up." I met her gaze, letting my thoughts churn. We'd gone on separate trips before, so I didn't have a strong reason to object. Still, something about this felt different. Forcing a calm smile, I said, "If it's something you've always wanted to do, then go for it. It sounds like a fun weekend." Her response caught me off guard. She sprang up from her chair, grabbed my face, and kissed me with a fervor I hadn't felt from her in ages, let alone before breakfast. "Oh, Rick, thank you. This means the world to me. I promise I'll make it up to you when I'm back." I gently peeled her hands off me, feeling a strange mix of amusement and doubt. As I stood, ready to leave, I gave her a light pat on the backside. "I won't be gone long, just heading to Alfie's. I'll be back around lunchtime." Her bright smile followed me out the door. Mine lingered too, though for an entirely different reason. I'd stayed composed, not betraying my doubts. But the truth hit me hard as I left. I was effectively investigating my own wife, suspecting her of being unfaithful. What kind of relationship had we fallen into? Could we even call this a marriage anymore? I arrived at Alfie's place, my lifelong friend since school. We played golf together often enough that Helen wouldn't question me heading there. Alfie was outside mowing his lawn when I pulled up. "Rick, what brings you here? Don't tell me it's Sunday already," he called out over the drone of the mower, adjusting his direction to face me. He finished a pass, then switched off the machine. "Something's eating at you. I can tell. Give me a moment to stash this away. Go on inside. No one's home, so we've got privacy." I entered through the garage, stepping into the cozy warmth of his house, which carried the lively imprint of his family. Waiting in the kitchen, I started up the coffee machine. Alfie joined me shortly, settling onto a stool across the counter. His expression was serious. "All right, Rick. What's going on?" I hesitated, struggling to find the right words. "I think Helen's seeing someone else. No, scratch that. I'm certain she is." His jaw dropped as he absorbed what I said. "You're joking, right? Helen? No way." I stayed quiet, and his face hardened as realization sank in. "You're serious? Damn. Who? When? How do you even know?" My throat tightened and tears stung my eyes. Alfie reached across the counter, placing a firm hand on my shoulder. "Whatever's happening, Rick, I'm here for you. We'll figure this out. Just tell me everything." Taking a deep breath, I laid it all out. What I'd observed, my mounting suspicions, and the unease that had been gnawing at me. Alfie listened intently, his face pale and troubled. When I finished, I felt both drained and slightly relieved. "So what's your next move?" he asked gently. "Are you planning to confront her?" "Eventually, yes, but I need all the facts first. She mentioned a dance group trip to Blackpool, but I suspect that's just a cover." We both stared out at his yard, the neat rows of grass, and the apple trees we'd planted together years ago. "Remember the day we put those in?" he said. "They've been giving us more apples every year, a little legacy from Mom." After my parents passed, his mother had become a surrogate parent to me. Her insight would have been invaluable now. "If she were still here," I joked, "she'd give Helen an earful." Alfie laughed. "Oh, she'd rip her a new one. Tough as nails, but always fair." His tone shifted back to seriousness. "What's your plan from here? If it's someone from her dance group, you'll need specifics." "What about those guys, George and Brian? Are they married? Do their wives know anything?" I nodded slowly. "Good points. They seem like possibilities, but I don't know much about anyone else in the group." "Then let's dig for the facts," Alfie said firmly. "And if it turns out you need to confront her, we'll do it right. You're not in this alone." His support gave me a flicker of hope. No matter what lay ahead, at least I knew I had someone in my corner. "Here's the plan," I said. "I'll have Patty discreetly ask around among the women. Maybe she can pick up some useful information about these guys. I'll make sure she keeps it low-key. We can't afford to tip them off." I exhaled deeply, grateful for his understanding. "Thanks for having my back. I really need that right now. I'm thinking I'll stay away from the club for a while. It's probably better to avoid running into any of them. So don't worry, all right?" We spent the next hour tossing around ideas for payback. Some were over the top, almost ridiculous, but strangely enough, just discussing them brought a surprising sense of relief. It was as if vocalizing the possibilities helped release some of the tension building inside me. When I glanced at the clock, it was already after 1 p.m. Helen might be wondering where I was, or at least I hoped she'd be. But a quick check of my phone revealed no missed calls. Before leaving Alfie's, I promised to touch base the next day or sooner if any new developments came up. On the drive home, my thoughts wandered to Helen. I'd always believed we were in a good place, content even. But now, with this betrayal hanging over us, I started noticing cracks I'd ignored before, subtle signs, fleeting moments I'd dismissed. Looking back, it all felt painfully obvious. How had I missed it? Week after week, I waved her off without a second thought, trusting her completely, too completely. Had I been more alert or more skeptical, could I have prevented this? I shook my head, forcing myself to focus. If I was going to confront Helen, I had to stay composed. This wasn't the moment for an emotional blow-up. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed the garage door open, but Helen's car was gone. Once inside, the house was eerily quiet. Thankfully, the kids were spending the weekend at their friends' places, so at least I didn't have to worry about them overhearing anything. Alone in the silence, I took a deep breath and decided it was time to look for answers. If there were clues, I was determined to find them. For over an hour, I searched through our computer and email accounts, but nothing suspicious turned up. Frustrated, I turned my attention to her drawers and closets upstairs. Again, I came up empty-handed. Sitting at the kitchen table, I tried to think of other possibilities. Maybe she and her companions were careful enough to leave no digital trace. Face-to-face conversations would explain the lack of evidence. But there had to be something. Somewhere. An idea struck me as I stared at my phone, a tracking app. It wouldn't solve everything, but it was a start. I searched the App Store and downloaded one onto my phone. My plan was to install it on Helen's phone as soon as I had the chance. That device likely held all the answers I needed, text messages, calls, or other incriminating details. Accessing it was my priority. Around 2 p.m., I heard the crunch of gravel in the driveway. Helen's car had returned. Her heels clicked against the brick path leading to the door. She stepped into the lounge, her eyes briefly locking with mine. For an instant, I thought I detected something. Unease? Guilt? Fear? She quickly averted her gaze, dropped her handbag by the sofa, and headed for the kitchen. "Coffee?" I offered, keeping my tone warm to mask my thoughts. She nodded, seemingly grateful. We sat across from each other at the breakfast bar, sipping our drinks in a tense silence. "How's Alfie?" she asked, breaking the quiet. "He's good. We're actually planning a fishing trip while you're out dancing with your friends, if that's all right with you. Oh, and Patty's interested in joining your group. Let her know if there's an opening." Helen's cheeks flushed slightly before she answered. "Oh, that's too bad," she said. "I found out this morning the group is full, but I'll let her know when there's another spot available." Her expression faltered for a moment, but she quickly masked it with an oddly smug look. "I'm going to shower," she said, finishing her coffee. "I feel gross after today." "Go ahead," I replied, pretending to focus on the sports section of the newspaper. The moment she was upstairs, I grabbed her handbag. Within minutes, I'd installed the tracking app on her phone. A quick scan of her messages showed short, vague exchanges, enough to confirm she'd been communicating with 3 people. The initials in her contacts matched the names of the men from the club. Strangely, I felt a small sense of relief that it wasn't a larger group. I jotted down the phone numbers and email addresses I found. While I couldn't access her email just yet, I noted that her password appeared to be 8 characters long. Cracking it would come later. Her call logs confirmed frequent conversations with the same contacts. Feeling satisfied for now, I put her phone back in her bag just as she finished her shower. The following days crawled by, heavy with tension but devoid of major developments. Questions swirled in my mind. Why? How long had this been happening? Were there others before these men? I avoided any physical closeness with Helen, and she didn't seem to care. If anything, she appeared distracted, her anticipation for the weekend getaway growing by the day. By Wednesday, her bags were packed, and her eagerness to leave was impossible to ignore. Thursday night, Helen came home later than usual, her face flushed. I was sipping whiskey when she walked in. "Have a good night?" I asked casually. "Yes," she replied, her tone light. "We finalized everything for the weekend. Hotels, travel, the works." I didn't push for more details, letting her believe I was indifferent. She had no idea I already knew the essentials. Patty had found the reservation. 2 hotel rooms, just enough for the 4 of them. Cozy. The next day, I met Alfie. "What's the game plan?" he asked as Patty handed us drinks. "I want to expose them," I admitted, "but I'm not going to do anything reckless. Helen and I are done. There's no coming back from this. Once she leaves tomorrow, her things will be packed and waiting at her parents' house. She won't set foot here again." Alfie nodded, his face serious. Patty placed a comforting hand on my shoulder, her voice gentle. "Stay strong," she said softly. "We're here for you, no matter what happens." Her presence behind me was a poignant reminder of all that had slipped away from my grasp. I couldn't even pinpoint the last time Helen and I had shared an embrace like this, let alone touched with any real affection. Weeks had passed, perhaps even longer, since we'd been close in any meaningful way. Hot tears traced silent paths down my cheeks as I stifled the sobs threatening to escape. With immense effort, I forced myself to steady my breathing and regain control. The emptiness in my chest, where my heart once beat with purpose, was unrelenting. Yet I knew I had to persevere through the days and weeks ahead. Tomorrow would be particularly agonizing, watching her leave, fully aware of what her plans entailed. But trying to stop her now would change nothing about the past, nor would it alter the course she had already chosen. Our marriage was broken beyond repair, the damage too deep to mend. With fists clenched tightly, I felt Patty's arms around me, her embrace grounding me, while Alfie placed a firm hand on mine. "We'll get through this, Rick," he said, his voice resolute. "We'll figure it out. They won't get away with it." By Friday afternoon, I left the office earlier than usual. Helen intended to be on the road by 4 p.m. Brian and his wife were driving up together, and Helen would meet them first before continuing the journey alone. She hadn't mentioned who else might be joining, but I already knew. Her car would inevitably find its way to his driveway for the weekend. Blackpool was a 2-hour drive, quicker and more convenient than taking the train, or so she claimed. It allowed her more flexibility, she said, in case she wanted to return earlier or make other plans. I helped her load the 2 suitcases into the trunk, noticing the nervous energy mingling with her excitement. As she glanced in my direction, I put on my most convincing smile. "Are you really okay with me going, Rick?" she asked, her eyes searching mine for any sign of resistance. "Why wouldn't I be?" I replied lightly. "It's not as if this is some scandalous getaway, right? Dancing has always been your thing, and you've talked about this for years. I only wish I could join you." Her expression softened, though a flicker of guilt passed over her face. "Well," I added, "go and have fun. Alfie and I have plans to go fishing this weekend, something to keep me busy while you're off living your dream." Her face tensed briefly, a strange mix of emotions flickering across her features. Guilt, perhaps. Maybe her conscience was beginning to catch up with her. But before either of us could linger on the moment, her phone buzzed. The sound shattered the tension between us. She fumbled through her bag, checked the screen, and said, "They're waiting for me. I need to go." Then, unexpectedly, she wrapped her arms around my neck and kissed me, deeply, passionately, in a way she hadn't in months. When she pulled back, I caught a glint of remorse in her eyes. What she saw in mine, I wasn't sure. Sadness, perhaps. Sliding into the driver's seat, she offered me a quick smile, started the engine, and drove away. I stood there, waving half-heartedly as tears blurred my vision. It was over, and I knew it. Turning back to the house, I made my way to the garage and retrieved the boxes I had prepared earlier. Carrying 2 upstairs, I began methodically packing her belongings. Clothing, makeup, toiletries, every trace of her presence. By the time I finished, the boxes were neatly sealed and stacked, ready for her to collect. I slumped into the chair, trying to catch my breath, when the house phone rang. "Rick," Alfie's voice greeted me, steady and familiar. "How's it going?" "All done," I said, exhaling. "Packed everything, just taking a minute to breathe." "Good. Take it easy tonight. Don't drink yourself into a stupor. We've got plans to handle tomorrow, remember? I'll pick you up in the morning. Yeah, I'll be ready. I'm heading over to her parents' place later to touch base, keep up appearances. Glancing at the tracker on my phone, I added, by the way, she's still at his place, only 3 miles away. We'll deal with it tomorrow. After hanging up, I let the quietness of the house settle over me, the emptiness pressing down like a weight. The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly toward 6 p.m. She had been gone for nearly 2 hours. Checking the tracker again, I confirmed she was still at his address. The thought of them together twisted a knife in my chest. Anger surged, and I hurled my glass across the room, watching it shatter against our wedding photo on the mantel. Unable to sit still, I grabbed my car keys and drove to her parents' house. By the time I arrived, it was close to 7:30 p.m. As always, they greeted me warmly, though they quickly asked about Helen. She's in Blackpool, I said, keeping my tone light. Went with some friends from her dance club. They're doing a ballroom event. How nice, her mother replied with a smile. I wish I'd known. I would have gone with her. Same here, I said, forcing a chuckle. But it's fine. I'll be fishing with Alfie all weekend. Just wanted to stop by in case you came looking for her at the house. Her father nodded, smiling. That's thoughtful of you, Rick. Thanks for letting us know. Oh, one more thing, I added casually. I've got some of Helen's things in boxes. She asked me to bring them over. I'll drop them by tomorrow morning. She can sort through them when she's back. They agreed without hesitation, and I left shortly after. As I drove home, a pang of sadness struck me. They were good people, and the thought of facing them after the truth came out felt unbearable. I'd have to write them a letter, explaining everything. Seeing their disappointment in person wasn't something I could endure. Our eyes met, and words became unnecessary. Gaz recognized my pain without explanation. He had faced his own torment years ago when his wife walked out. That breakup had shattered him. Enraged, he'd let his fury explode, roughing up both her and her new partner before others intervened. The man she'd left him for wasn't just anyone. He was an old-school nemesis. Their rivalry had only festered over time, and Gaz still clung to the bitterness. As for his wife, she was long gone, far from his reach, yet Gaz hadn't moved on. If she were to return, he'd welcome her without hesitation. For now, though, his energy was channeled into evening the score, a quest for a taste of retribution. We merged onto the motorway heading towards Blackpool, with Alfie behind the wheel while I made a call to the private investigator. The update was both expected and damning. He had managed to charm his way into the hotel's premises, gaining access to a certain room where he recorded everything. Pictures, videos, the proof of what I already knew. The group had spent the day indulging in their debauchery, swapping partners without a care in the world. I thanked him, told him his work was done, and requested he send the evidence by morning. Alfie, listening in through the hands-free, glanced my way. When the call ended, he gave my shoulder a firm squeeze, offering silent support as I sat there lost in thought. Why, Alfie? I asked quietly. Why's she doing this? CK, some things you'll never understand, but it's done now. We've got a plan. Let's stick to it and focus. We rolled into Blackpool around 11:30 p.m. Cruising past the hotel, we scanned the area for the cars. With the registration numbers and models in hand, we quickly spotted them tucked away in a secluded corner. Parking our truck a short distance away, we strolled back towards the vehicles, keeping our pace casual. Once back at the truck, we prepared. Surgical gloves, dark glasses, balaclavas. The street was empty as we slipped back into the parking lot, vaulting over a low wall that shielded the area. With no CCTV in sight, we worked swiftly and silently. Brian's car was first. Within moments, we clipped all 4 valve stems. A crowbar made short work of the fuel cap, allowing us to pour in a foul mixture of sand, sugar, and debris. Stifling laughter, we moved on. George's car received the same treatment for the tires, but we added some extra flair. Deep scratches marred the paintwork by the time we were done. In less than 2 minutes, we had completed our sabotage and slipped back over the wall, laughing like kids pulling a prank. The drive southward was uneventful, but for the first time in ages, I felt a strange sense of empowerment. It was as if I was reclaiming control over my life. We pulled up outside George's house, and I quietly climbed into my wife's car with the spare key. There was no way Helen's prized Mini Cooper would escape unscathed. We drove to a desolate lane and got to work. A sledgehammer made short work of the windscreen, sunroof, and side windows. A spray can provided the final touch, a crude outline of a nude woman and a fake phone number scrawled along the side. By 3 a.m., we returned the car to its spot on George's driveway and eased away in the truck. Back at the lake, Gaz lay sprawled among a litter of empty beer cans, his fishing rods neatly packed away. "Looks like fishing wasn't the priority," Alfie chuckled. Gaz stirred as we climbed into the bivvy. "Everything sorted?" he mumbled sleepily. "No problems, mate. Get some rest," I replied. Sunday morning greeted us with heavy dew and the mouth-watering aroma of eggs and bacon. Patty was busy at the camping stove, a warm smile on her face. "Thought you boys could use a proper breakfast," she said, setting plates before us. "Oh, and the lake's owner and his wife will be dropping by later. I figured we could do with some company." Crawling out of my sleeping bag, I grinned at her. Patty was a gem, sharp, kind, and endlessly resourceful. Alfie was one lucky man. "How'd you manage to land someone like her, Alfie?" I teased. "No clue, mate. Just pure luck, I reckon." Despite everything, I felt a flicker of gratitude. My wife might be gone, but my mates were still here. When the lake's owner arrived, we shared coffee and bacon sandwiches, even snapping a group photo with 2 massive carp Gaz had caught during the night. The sun shone brightly, casting a warm glow over the scene. The peace was shattered by the shrill chirping of a phone. Alfie glanced at his watch, grinning. "It's starting." Call after call rolled in, each one pushing us further into fits of laughter. By the time Helen's frantic attempts to reach me ended, it was clear her day had been a disaster. Her lover's cars were wrecked, stranding them far from home. Returning to retrieve her own car, she found it vandalized. And when she finally made her way back to our former home, she discovered her keys no longer worked. 34 missed calls later, her desperation was palpable. Good. By 9 p.m. the calls ceased. Alfie's phone buzzed, and he answered with a knowing smile. "All done," he said, slapping me a high five. Gaz, observing from the side, raised an eyebrow. "Change the locks," Alfie explained with a chuckle. The silence of the night stretched on. I tracked Helen's phone and saw she had returned to George's house. Part of me had expected her to run to her parents', but her choice to keep things quiet suited me just fine. This day was meant to teach her a lesson, though I wasn't finished yet. I ignored her remaining calls and messages, letting her stew in her own regret and confusion. As the evening deepened, Patty insisted I stay the night. "You've had enough excitement for one day," she said, pouring another whiskey. "No need for any rash decisions." By 11:30 p.m., Helen was back at George's. I smiled to myself, knowing this was only the beginning. She had much more to answer for before I was done. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you.